I thought I was just driving a woman to her night shift. An hour later, I was the getaway driver for what felt like a silent professional child abduction. They didn't use guns. They used my rideshare app, a polite tone, and the promise of a big tip to make me their unwilling accomplice. My name is Liam, and for about a year and a half after college, my life wasn't measured in days or weeks, but in pings, fares, and the cold, impartial judgment of the 5-star rating system. I drove for a rideshare app called Drift. I need to be clear about this from the start. It wasn't a career choice. It was an act of quiet desperation, a way to chip away at a mountain of student loan debt while I figured out what to do with a liberal arts degree that was proving to be exceptionally good at gathering dust on my nightstand. My entire world was the driver's seat of my 2018 Toyota Camry, a car I was still making payments on, and my office was a sprawling, quiet network of streets that made up Maple Creek, Ohio. You might have a picture of a place like Maple Creek in your head. It's one of those towns that feels peaceful, almost idyllic, until you spend too many nights driving through its empty, amber-lit neighborhoods. Then you start to see the loneliness in the gaps between the streetlights. You learn the rhythms of the city, not by the sun, but by the app. You learn to categorize the population by its fares. The boisterous, laughing college kids from Maple Creek University heading downtown, smelling of cheap beer and Axe body spray. The silent, weary commuters going home from the late shift at the plastics factory on the edge of town. Their exhaustion a tangible thing in the back seat. The couples on awkward first dates who fill the car with a nervous, electric silence. I had a system. I had to. The illusion of being your own boss fades fast when you realize you're really working for an algorithm. I'd start my shift around 5 p.m., catching the dinner and post-work rush. Then I'd power through the bar closing surge around 2 a.m., which was the most profitable and most chaotic part of the night. If I was still short of my self-imposed $150 nightly goal after that, I'd grind it out until 3 or 4 in the morning, picking up the dregs, the stragglers, the service industry workers, the lonely souls with nowhere else to be. This story happened on one of those nights. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where persistent, drizzling rain makes the world look like it's melting. The roads were slick and black, reflecting the traffic lights in long, watercolor streaks. Business was slow. By 1:30 a.m., I had only cleared $95, and my eyelids felt like they were lined with sand. I was parked in the overly bright lot of a 24-hour supermarket, the rain drumming a soft, hypnotic rhythm on the roof, scrolling through my phone and trying to decide whether to call it a night and accept the financial defeat. I told myself I'd take just one more decent fare, something over $10, and then I'd head home. I remember the triviality of it all, the utter boring reality of that moment. You know, you always think that a life-changing event will have some kind of grand announcement, some feeling of foreboding, but there was nothing. My world was small, predictable, and contained within the 4 doors of that Camry. I was thinking about how my car needed an oil change and trying to remember if I had enough clean laundry to get me through the rest of the week. That's where my head was at, just waiting for the next ping. Just as I was about to put the car in drive and head for my apartment, my phone chimed with that familiar Pavlovian ping, a new ride request. I glanced at the screen, the blue and white interface cutting through the gloom of my car. The pickup was about 8 minutes away in a neighborhood called Chestnut Hill. It was a quiet, older residential area on the west side of town, filled with modest single-family homes and established trees. The passenger's name was Sarah, and her rating was a perfect 5.0. In the world of ride-sharing, a 5-star passenger is gold. It means they're polite, they show up on time, and they don't leave a mess. It was always a good sign. The destination was a place called the North Point Industrial Park, a 15-minute drive to the absolute edge of town. It was a little strange for this time of night, but not unheard of. The factory there had a 24/7 operation, and people who worked the third shift often used ride shares. The estimated fare was $12.50. It fit my criteria perfectly. It was the last ride of the night, the one that would push me over my goal and let me go home. I tapped accept without a second thought. As I pulled out of the supermarket lot, the rain started coming down a little harder, drumming a steady, lulling rhythm on the roof. The drive to Chestnut Hill was quiet, almost hypnotic. I passed darkened houses, the occasional porch light casting a lonely, diffuse glow on a wet lawn. My internal monologue was already running through the post-ride checklist, the mental script I'd performed thousands of times. End the trip, rate the passenger, check for forgotten items, turn the app off, drive home. There was no sense of foreboding, no chill running down my spine. The only feeling I had was a mild, weary relief that my long, slow night was finally about to be over. I turned onto Sarah Street, a lane lined with big oak trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn their autumn colors, though they just looked black and skeletal in the dark. The app's voice guided me to the address. It was a small, neat brick house with white trim, the kind of place you see on a postcard for small-town America. The porch light was on, illuminating a welcome mat and a pot of mums that had been soaked by the rain. It all looked completely, utterly normal. The very picture of safety. I pulled up to the curb, put the car in park, and tapped the arrived button on my phone, sending a notification to Sarah. The app's timer immediately started ticking down the 5 minutes I was obligated to wait. I just sat there, listening to the soft hum of the engine and the steady patter of the rain on the windshield. I remember looking at that warm, inviting porch light and feeling nothing at all. I was just a guy in a car waiting to do a job. I was completely unaware that I had just pulled up to the starting line, that I was about to accept a fare that would take me somewhere far darker than an industrial park, and that my quiet, predictable life was about to end. About a minute after I arrived, the front door of the brick house opened. A woman stepped out from under the warm glow of the porch light, holding a small umbrella to shield herself from the drizzle. She hurried down the short walkway and pulled open the rear passenger side door of my Camry. "Hi, Liam?" she asked, her voice soft and a little hesitant. "That's me. Hi, Sarah," I replied, giving her my standard, friendly but not too chatty driver smile in the rearview mirror. It's a smile I had perfected, a quick, professional acknowledgement that says, "I'm not a threat," without inviting a long conversation. She slid into the back seat, closing the door with a solid thud that sealed us into our own little world. She shook the rain from her umbrella before carefully placing it on the rubber floor mat. She looked exactly like you'd expect a Sarah from Chestnut Hill to look. She was probably in her mid to late 30s, with neatly cut, shoulder-length brown hair and a kind, unassuming face. She was wearing a simple jacket and jeans. She even smelled normal, a faint, pleasant scent of what I think was lavender soap and rain. "Tough night to be out," I said. It was my go-to line for bad weather, a neutral opener that could lead to more conversation or just hang in the air. She gave a small, tired laugh. "Tell me about it. Thanks for coming to get me." I pulled away from the curb and followed the GPS navigation as it guided me toward the industrial park. The first few minutes of the ride were spent in a comfortable, easy silence. After thousands of rides, you get a sixth sense about people. Some passengers want to talk, to unload about their day, or ask about yours. Others just want to be a silent passenger, a piece of human cargo being transported from point A to point B. Sarah was clearly in the latter category. She just stared out her window, watching the rain-streaked houses and blurry streetlights go by. I put on some low-volume instrumental music, my default for quiet passengers. It was enough to fill the silence without being intrusive. I figured she was probably tired, heading to a long shift at a boring job. I felt a small sense of solidarity with her. We were two people awake in the middle of a Tuesday night, doing things we probably didn't want to be doing, just trying to get through it. I remember looking at her briefly in the rearview mirror. Her expression was placid, maybe a little sad around her eyes. There was absolutely nothing about her that raised any red flags. She was a picture of harmless mundanity. And that, looking back now, was the most disarming thing of all. True horror doesn't announce itself with a thunderclap or a monster jumping out of the closet. It wears a normal face. It sits quietly in the back of your car and makes you feel completely at ease, all while the world is tilting off its axis right under you, and you're too busy thinking about the fare to even notice. We were about 5 minutes away from the industrial park, driving along a sparsely populated stretch of road that led out of town. The rain had eased to a light mist that hung in the air, blurring the edges of the trees lining the road. My mind was already on my bed. I was mentally calculating the final fare, picturing myself kicking off my damp shoes and collapsing for the night. It was right then that the routine was broken. A soft buzz came from the back seat, followed by the faint blue glow of a phone screen illuminating Sarah's face in my rearview mirror. She looked down at it, and I saw her expression shift. It was subtle, but it was there. The placid tired look she'd worn the whole ride was replaced by a flicker of something else. Anxiety. Urgency. She took a sharp, quiet breath. "Oh no," she whispered, mostly to herself. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice now carrying a note of strained apology. "Liam, I'm so sorry to do this. That was my sister. My little niece isn't feeling well, and she needs me to come over right away. Is there any way we can make a quick stop? It's just a little bit out of the way. I'll add a really generous tip for your trouble." This was the first anomaly. A change in destination. You might think this happens all the time, but it's rarer than you'd expect, especially this late at night. It's always a bit of a hassle. Still, her story was completely plausible. A sick kid is a universal emergency. Her tone was apologetic, and the promise of a big tip was a powerful motivator for a driver hovering just under his goal. My internal calculus kicked in immediately. A few extra minutes for what could be a $20 or even $30 tip? In my world, that was an easy decision. "Yeah, of course," I said, trying to sound accommodating. "No problem at all. Just update the stop in the app." "Thank you so much," she said, and the relief washing over her voice felt genuine. "You're a lifesaver." I watched in the mirror as she fiddled with her phone, her thumbs moving quickly across the screen. A moment later, my own phone pinged, and the GPS map rerouted. The app updated with a new stop. The address was for a place called the Oakwood Terrace Apartments, about a 10-minute detour from our current path. After that, the final destination was still listed as the industrial park. I told myself it made perfect sense. She was probably going to drop something off for a sick niece, maybe some medicine or just be there for moral support, and then continue on to her night shift. I was just the driver. It wasn't my business where she went, as long as the app was running and the fare was ticking up. But looking back, I can see that this was the moment. This was the hook, the little lie, plausible and soaked in sympathy, that pulled me off my predictable path and set my wheels on a road that led straight into the dark. The Oakwood Terrace apartments were on the other side of a set of railroad tracks, in a part of town that was a little more worn around the edges than Chestnut Hill. The complex was a series of long, two-story buildings made of faded brown brick, with exterior walkways and metal railings that were showing faint orange spots of rust through the paint. It was the kind of place that always seemed to have a few flickering, buzzing fluorescent lights in the breezeways, casting a sickly greenish light on everything. I pulled into the half-empty parking lot, which was dotted with wide puddles from the rain. "Which building is it?" I asked, looking around at the identical anonymous structures. "Just right here is fine," Sarah said quickly, almost cutting me off. "I'll only be a minute, I swear. I just have to run this up to her. Do you mind waiting? I'll make it worth your while." "Sure, no problem," I said, reverting to my default customer service politeness. She got out of the car, leaving her small floral tote bag on the seat behind me, and hurried toward the nearest building. She didn't look back as she disappeared up a dark flight of concrete stairs. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 2:11 a.m. I figured I'd wait 5 minutes, 10 at the most. I leaned my seat back, the engine still humming quietly, and started scrolling through social media on my phone, trying to pass the time. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The initial feeling of obliging patience began to curdle into annoyance. This was cutting into my time, my bottom line, and her promise of a minute was quickly turning into a lie. At the 15-minute mark, I was officially losing money on this ride. I sent a quick message through the Drift app. "Everything okay?" No reply. I sighed, running a hand over my tired face. I considered my options. I could cancel the ride, but then I'd only get a fraction of the fare, and I'd have to deal with her abandoned bag. You're not supposed to just leave a passenger's belongings. I decided to give her 5 more minutes, a final act of goodwill. The complex was eerily quiet, the only sound being the distant, mournful rumble of a freight train passing by. A single window on the second floor of the building she'd entered was lit, casting a pale yellow square onto the wet pavement of the parking lot. I stared at it, and for the first time that night, a vague sense of unease started to creep in. Why was this taking so long? If your niece is sick, you run in. You drop off whatever you have. You give a quick hug, and you leave. The story about the sick niece started to feel thin, flimsy. The whole situation felt off, a sharp deviation from the thousands of predictable trips I'd made. It was the waiting, the deep silence of the complex, the unanswered message. It was the feeling of being in a place I wasn't supposed to be, tethered to a stranger's unexplained delay. The rain-slicked parking lot, which had just been a location a few minutes ago, suddenly started to feel isolated and exposed, and I was sitting right in the middle of it. 20 minutes. That was my limit. My annoyance had now fully bloomed into a quiet, simmering anger. I was being taken for a ride. Literally. I decided I was done waiting. I was going to call Drift support, report an unresponsive passenger, and let them deal with it. As I reached for my phone, my eyes fell on a tote bag she had left on the back seat. It was a simple canvas bag with a floral pattern, the kind you'd buy at a Target or Kohl's. It was partially unzipped. My curiosity, mixed with a growing need to justify my suspicion, got the better of me. Looking back now, I know how stupid this was. But in the moment, I told myself I was just checking to see if her wallet was in there. Maybe find some ID to help support get in touch with her. It was a flimsy excuse, even to myself. I just needed to know. I unbuckled my seatbelt, turned awkwardly in my seat, and reached into the back. I didn't rummage through it. I just hooked a finger on the zipper and pulled it open a little further. What I saw inside sent a sudden, sharp chill through me that had nothing to do with the damp night air. There wasn't a wallet or keys. Instead, nestled amongst some neatly folded clothes was a child's worn brown teddy bear with one mismatched button eye. Next to it was a 3-pack of apple juice boxes and a blue asthma inhaler, the kind for kids. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. The sick niece. Okay, maybe she was bringing her a care package. That was the logical explanation. But then a question formed, sharp and clear and cold. If her sister had only just texted her a few minutes ago to say the niece was sick, why were these items already packed in her bag? Why would she be carrying her niece's personal asthma inhaler with her on her way to work before she even knew there was a problem? It didn't add up. It felt wrong. I tried to rationalize it. Coincidence. Maybe the kid left it in her car earlier that day. Maybe she was planning to drop it off tomorrow anyway. But the explanations felt hollow, like lies I was telling myself to stay calm. The presence of that specific inhaler, a medical necessity, felt significant. It felt premeditated. In an instant, the bag transformed from a simple, forgotten item into a piece of evidence. Evidence of what, I had no idea. But the vague sense of unease I'd been feeling for the last 20 minutes solidified into a cold, hard knot of genuine fear in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a normal fare. This wasn't a simple delay. Something was very, very wrong. And I was sitting right in the middle of it. My heart was starting to pound a low, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I quickly zipped the tote bag shut, my fingers feeling clumsy and numb. My flight or fight response was screaming at me to just drive. Just go. Leave the bag. Report it later. Get the hell out of there. My hand was on the gear shift, ready to slam the car into drive and peel out of that parking lot for good, when the rear driver's side door was pulled open. I flinched so hard, I hit my head on the cold glass of the window. I whipped around to see a man sliding into the back seat as if he had every right in the world to be there. He was probably in his 40s, with short, neat brown hair, and he was wearing a dark, well-fitting jacket over a collared shirt. He looked like a high school principal or an accountant, utterly normal. He closed the door quietly, the sound unnervingly soft, and settled into the seat. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice completely calm and even. "Change of plans. She sent me." He didn't offer a name or an explanation. He just spoke with a placid, unnerving authority that didn't match the situation at all. My mind was a chaotic mess of confusion and rising panic. Who the hell was this guy? Where was Sarah? What? I stammered, my own voice sounding weak and distant to my ears. "New destination," he said, ignoring my question completely. He looked past me, out the front windshield into the dark, rainy lot. "We're heading to 1125 Winding Way. It's over in the Mill Creek subdivision." He spoke the address as if I had already agreed to take him, as if my role as the driver in this bizarre transaction was a settled fact. His sudden appearance, his calm demeanor, his complete disregard for the inherent strangeness of the situation, it was all profoundly disorienting. I was frozen, caught between the instinct to demand answers and the deep, primal fear of what those answers might be. He wasn't overtly threatening, but his presence felt like a total violation. He had entered my space, my car, without permission, and was now acting as if he owned it. I can't just, I started to protest, my voice trailing off. He finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes were flat, brown, and utterly emotionless. "The trip is still active, isn't it?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. It was a statement of fact. "Just drive. Sarah will compensate you for the extra time. His tone left no room for argument. It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of a polite request. And in that moment, paralyzed by a specific kind of fear I couldn't yet name, I obeyed. My hand, which a moment before had been ready to flee, now put the car in drive. I pulled out of the parking lot, away from the apartments and the flickering fluorescent lights, and into an even deeper, more terrifying darkness. The man was surprisingly talkative, but his conversation felt hollow, like a script he was reading from a teleprompter only he could see. He asked me about my night, how long I'd been driving for Drift, the usual passenger small talk. It felt completely calculated, a deliberate attempt to put me at ease, to normalize the utterly abnormal situation we were in. I gave short, mumbled answers, my eyes constantly flicking between the road and the rearview mirror, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Tough gig, I bet," he said, looking out the side window at the dark, passing scenery, dealing with all sorts of people at all hours. "It has its moments," I managed to say, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. Then he made his mistake. He glanced over at the floral tote bag still sitting on the seat next to him, where Sarah's umbrella had been. He gestured at it with his chin. "Glad she remembered to bring that," he said with a casual, almost fatherly chuckle. "The little one can't sleep without her Mr. Snuggles." The world stopped. For a split second, there was no sound, no rain, no engine hum. Just those two words. "Mr. Snuggles." My blood went ice cold, because when I had looked in that bag, I had seen the teddy bear. It was brown, worn, with a single black button for an eye, and sewn onto the little red ribbon tied around its neck in faded, loopy cursive was a name tag. I had seen it clear as day under the dim interior light. The name wasn't Mr. Snuggles. The name was Barnaby. It was such a small detail, a tiny, insignificant error, but in the context of everything else, Sarah's sudden disappearance, this man's arrival, the premeditated feel of the inhaler in the bag, it was a seismic event. It was the final, irrefutable proof that this was all a lie. A carefully constructed, premeditated lie. They weren't just disorganized or forgetful. They were deceptive. And this man, this calm, well-dressed man in my back seat, was a part of it. His casual confidence was no longer just unnerving. It was predatory. The small talk wasn't friendly. It was a form of control, a way to keep me docile and unsuspecting. I didn't say anything. I just kept my eyes fixed on the road, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He had no idea the mistake he just made. He had no idea that with two simple, wrong words, he had peeled back the curtain and shown me the monster hiding just beneath the skin of normalcy. I was no longer a driver. I was a witness. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that was a far more dangerous thing to be. We drove in silence for a few minutes after his comment about the teddy bear. The only sound was the rhythmic swish of the wiper blades and the quiet hum of the tires on wet pavement. The man seemed perfectly content, occasionally glancing down at his phone. I was anything but. My mind was a frantic storm of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I was trying to figure out what I had stumbled into. It felt like an abduction, but it was so clean, so quiet, so unnervingly professional. Then, his phone rang. It wasn't a cheerful ringtone, just the professional, sterile buzz that cut through the quiet of the car. He answered it immediately. "Yeah," he said into the phone, and his entire demeanor transformed. The fake, friendly passenger was gone completely. In his place was someone cold, efficient, and dangerous. His voice was clipped, all business. Is it done? He paused, listening. A thin, cruel smile touched the corner of his lips. Good. No, he's with me. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, our eyes met. His were like chips of ice. He's compliant. We're about 10 minutes out. Compliant. The word hit me like a physical blow. He was talking about me. I wasn't a driver providing a service anymore. I was an asset being managed. I was a tool being used. In their plan, whatever it was, I was just compliant. He listened for another moment, then said, "No loose ends. I'll handle it. See you there." He hung up. He didn't put the phone back in his pocket. He just held it in his hand, his thumb resting on the dark screen. He didn't look at me again. He just stared straight ahead, as if I was nothing more than part of the car's machinery, the part that steered. The fear that had been a cold, hard knot in my stomach now exploded, flooding every part of my body with ice. This was no longer a suspicion. This was real. I was an unwilling participant in a serious crime. The phrase "no loose ends" echoed in my head over and over. I was a loose end. The most dangerous loose end of all. I was the one person not in on their plan, who knew their faces, who knew the car I was driving, who knew the route we were taking. The $15 fare, the hope of getting home to my bed, it all seemed like a joke from another lifetime. My only goal now was survival, and I had the sickening feeling that my chances were getting slimmer with every mile we drove. Those next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. The interior of my Camry, which was usually my safe space, my mobile office, my little bubble of solitude, had become a cage. The man in the back seat was silent now, but his presence filled the entire car. It was a heavy, suffocating pressure that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. Every little sound was amplified. The soft tick of the turn signal, the gentle splash of the tires through a puddle, the quiet hum of the climate control. It all sounded deafeningly loud. The city lights of Maple Creek, normally a comforting sign of life in the dark, now seemed alien and menacing. They illuminated a world that I was no longer a part of. I was in a separate reality, a bubble of quiet terror, driving through the sleeping town. My mind was a high-speed, chaotic slideshow of escape plans. I could slam on the brakes in the middle of an intersection and just run. I could swerve into a ditch. I could crash the car into a telephone pole. But what then? He was right behind me. What if he was armed? The line from the phone call, "I'll handle it," suggested he was prepared for complications. For me. My own body was betraying me. My hands were slick with sweat, making the steering wheel feel slippery and foreign in my grip. My legs felt weak and shaky on the pedals. My breath was shallow, and I could feel my heart thudding against my ribs with a frantic, unsteady rhythm. At one point, I saw a police car cruise by in the opposite direction, its red and blue lights off, just on a routine patrol. My heart leaped with a desperate, painful hope. I wanted to flash my high beams, to honk the horn, to do anything to get its attention. But I couldn't. The man was watching me. I could feel his eyes on the back of my neck. I knew that any sudden, erratic move would be the last one I made. My drive would be over in a way I didn't want to imagine. So I just drove. I kept my speed exactly at the speed limit. I used my turn signals at every turn. I stopped completely at every stop sign. I was a model driver, a perfect compliant tool. I was driving myself to a destination I didn't know, to an outcome I feared would be my last. Each passing street sign, each green light, was another step closer to the end of the line, and all I could do was steer us there, my hands locked on the wheel like a condemned man. The GPS voice calmly announced, "Your destination is on the right." 1125 Winding Way was in a newer upscale subdivision called Mill Creek. The houses were large and set far back from the road, with perfectly manicured lawns that looked like dark green carpet under the streetlights. It was the kind of neighborhood that projected an image of safety and affluence, a place where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen. The house itself was a big two-story modern colonial, completely dark except for a single, warm light glowing on the porch. I pulled up to the curb, my entire body rigid with tension. "Okay," the man said, his voice once again calm and even, as if we had just arrived for a friendly visit. "Wait here." He got out of the car and closed the door softly. My first instinct, the primal urge, was to floor it, to leave him standing there and just drive until I ran out of gas. But his final words, "wait here," felt less like an instruction and more like a test of my compliance. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the accelerator, my mind screaming. Before I could make a decision, a dark SUV with tinted windows pulled into the house's long driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness and sweeping across my car. It came to a silent stop. My car's engine was the only sound on the otherwise dead silent street. The passenger door of the SUV opened and Sarah got out. She looked exactly the same as when she'd left my car what felt like an eternity ago. She walked quickly to the back door of the SUV. The man from my car met her there. Another figure, whose face I couldn't see in the shadows, opened the other back door, and then I saw them lift a small child out of the car. It was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing pink pajamas. She was sleepy and compliant, rubbing her eyes with a tiny fist. In her arms, she clutched a worn brown teddy bear, Barnaby. My blood went ice cold. They didn't drag her. They didn't force her. They led her gently by the hand, up the manicured walkway, Sarah on one side, the man on the other. They looked for all the world like a normal family bringing their tired child home late at night after a long trip. They unlocked the front door, guided the little girl inside, and then disappeared into the house, closing the door behind them and leaving the porch light to cast a lonely, mocking glow on the empty walkway. The quiet, horrifying efficiency of it all made me feel sick. This wasn't a violent, chaotic kidnapping you see in movies. This was a planned, precise, and silent extraction. In my Toyota Camry, my little mobile office had been the first stage of the operation. I sat there in the deafening silence of the suburban street, my mind struggling to process the scene I had just witnessed. It was so clean, so calm, so devoid of the chaos I would have expected. It felt unreal. A moment later, the man emerged from the house alone and walked back toward my car. My entire body tensed. This was it, the no loose ends part. He wasn't going to just let me drive away now. He walked to my passenger side window. I didn't dare roll it down. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned white. He didn't knock. He simply opened the passenger door, leaned in, and placed a small, heavy object, wrapped in a white cloth napkin, on the empty seat next to me. He didn't hand it to me. He just set it down with a quiet finality. He looked me directly in the eyes. His gaze was flat, assessing, like a biologist studying an insect. It was the look of a man who was used to solving problems, permanently. "You're a good driver, Liam. You see a lot of things. You pick people up, you drop them off, but you don't remember faces. You don't remember addresses. You were never here tonight. You understand?" His words were a clear, unambiguous threat, delivered with the sterile precision of a surgeon. This was the semantic core of their world, Actions have consequences, and silence has a price. If you understand, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, you'll find the rest of this payment in your bank account in a week, untraceable. If you don't, well, we know where you live. Your app tells us everything. Your name, your address, your picture, everything. He straightened up and closed the door gently. He didn't look back. He walked to the black SUV, got in, and it pulled out of the driveway without a sound, its taillights disappearing around the corner, leaving me alone in the oppressive dark of that wealthy, silent neighborhood. The threat hung in the air, more terrifying than any weapon. They didn't need a gun. They had information. They had my life, neatly packaged in my Drift driver profile. The very tool I used to make a living, the app that connected me to the city, had become the leash they now held around my neck. In that moment, the illusion of my own safety was shattered into a million pieces. I was completely, utterly exposed. I don't remember the drive home. It's a complete blank in my memory, a pocket of time erased by sheer, undiluted terror. The next thing I knew, I was parked in my designated spot at my own apartment complex, the engine off, my hand shaking so violently I could barely unbuckle my seatbelt. I stumbled into my apartment and locked the door, leaning my full weight against it as my legs finally gave out. I slid to the floor, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I stayed there for a long time, just listening to the sound of my own frantic heartbeat in the silence of my apartment. Eventually, the adrenaline subsided, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its place. I looked at the cloth-wrapped object I had carried in with me. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped it. It was a thick, dense roll of $100 bills, held together by a single, tight rubber band. I'd never seen so much cash in one place. I counted it. $10,000. A down payment. Next day, I deleted the Drift app from my phone. I called their support line and told them I was deactivating my account for personal reasons. I never drove for a rideshare service again. I never received the rest of the payment, and a profound, sickening relief washed over me when the week passed and my bank account remained unchanged. I took the cash and hid it in an old shoebox in the back of my closet. I couldn't spend it. It felt like poison, like blood money. For weeks, I obsessively scoured the local and national news, searching for any mention of a missing child, an Amber Alert, a custody dispute gone wrong. Nothing. There was never a report. The police never announced an investigation. The little girl in the pink pajamas, holding her bear Barnaby, had vanished from the world without a trace. Or perhaps she'd been returned to it. I will never know. I don't know if I was a party to a rescue or an abduction. I don't know if Sarah and the man were grieving parents taking back what was theirs or monstrous criminals stealing a child. That silence, that ambiguity, is the most terrifying part of the whole story. It's been 2 years. I have a normal job now, an office job with a regular paycheck and benefits. But I am not the same. Every time a car I don't recognize parks on my street for too long, my heart seizes. Every time my phone rings from an unknown number, a cold sweat breaks out on my neck. The money is still in the shoebox, a heavy, rectangular reminder of my compliance. They showed me that the world I thought I knew, the world of rules and consequences and safety, is just a thin, fragile veneer. And underneath it is another world, a world that operates on its own, silent, brutal logic. I was a loose end they chose not to tie up, and I have to live every day with the knowledge that they know exactly where I am. I was just a driver. I picked someone up and I dropped them off. And it ruined my life. Thank you for watching Horror Story. That's all for tonight's story. It's strange how a single ordinary decision, like accepting one last fare for the night, can completely shatter your sense of safety. I still think about that night, about the unanswered questions that will probably haunt me forever. What really happened to that little girl? Was I helping her or harming her? I'll likely never know. If you have a story about a time your gut instinct told you something was deeply wrong, I'd be interested to read it in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Horror Story and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next unsettling account. Until next time, stay safe out there and always trust that feeling in your gut.